Fans were astonished by a secret that Freddie Mercury held in 1991. The Queen singer concealed his illness for years even though he was dying. Despite his weakened body, his voice remained strong. His final video was shot in black and white to conceal his extreme illness. He ceased taking any medication in his last days, with the exception of painkillers. Within 24 hours of sharing what he had with the world, he passed away. We're exposing the truth about Freddie Mercury's last days today. On September 5, 1946, Freddie Mercury was born Farrokh Bulsara in Stonetown, Zanzibar. His parents were Parsis with Indian ancestry, Bomi and Jair. They were from the tiny city of Bulsar, which is today Valsad, Gujarat. His family practiced Zoroastrianism, a faith that originated in ancient Persia. Freddie was noticeable from the start. He thought that his strong singing voice came from his odd mouth shape, which included 4 additional teeth at birth. His range included soaring soprano and deep bass. Due to Zanzibar's continued British domination, he was also born a British subject. That little detail would subsequently lead to opportunities that would permanently alter his life. Kashmira, Freddie's sister, was born when he was 6 years old. He formally obtained British and colonial citizenship in 1969, after several years. His early years were affluent and tranquil in Zanzibar, just as his renown was beginning to grow. His father was a cashier in the High Court for the British Colonial Office. Because of the work, the family had a unique position. The majority of people did not live comfortably, but they did. Freddie was taught by Anglican nuns in a missionary-run school when he first started attending. In 1964, everything changed, but it offered him a taste of British education. There was a bloody revolution in Zanzibar. Thousands of South Asians and Arabs were slaughtered. They had to escape, the Bulsaris. They fled to England, abandoning everything. Freddie was 17 years old. The abrupt change from island splendor to Chile, Grey Felton was noticeable. Nothing was the same in life ever again. However, the actual beginnings had already begun years before. Freddie's parents enrolled him to St. Peter's School in Panchugni, India, when he was 8 years old. It was a boarding school in the British manner, nestled in the hills outside of Mumbai. It was a rigorous place. Students spoke proper English, complied with regulations, and wore uniforms. But there was an unexpected event. The headmaster requested Freddie's parents to pay more for piano lessons after noticing his talent. Something significant started with that little choice. Freddie picked everything up fast. He was not merely good. He had a talent. He painted, performed in plays, played the piano, and played sports with ease. Despite his silence, he was never unnoticeable. His teeth earned him the nickname Bucky from other children. It didn't bother him at all. He was named the school's top all-around player when he was 12. That's what Freddie was all about. Excellent in everything, but particularly performing. He returned to Zanzibar in 1963, brimming with new ideas and a fresh sense of self. He had experienced the excitement of the stage before then, though. Freddie joined the band The Hectics while he was at St. Peter's. He was 12 years old. 4 additional boys were part of the group: Victory, Farang, Derek, and Bruce. Songs by Little Richard, Cliff Richard, and Elvis were performed. In addition to singing, Freddie played the piano. The ease with which he could mimic music simply by listening to it astounded everyone. He swept his fingers across the keyboard. At school functions, the band became a minor celebrity. The children clapped, danced, and screamed. Freddie got his first taste of what it was like to be a star thanks to that early attention. Rock music, however, wasn't the only influence on his style. Additionally, he listened to Bollywood legends Kishore Kumar and Lata Mangeshkar. Later, their emotive vocals would have an impact on Queen's dramatic, theatrical songwriting. He passed his grade 4 piano exams before leaving St. Peter's. When Freddie's life in Zanzibar collapsed in 1964, he was only 17. The island was ablaze with bloodshed. He and other Parsi Indians were the targets of a wave of hatred that claimed thousands of lives. His family was at a loss. They ran. After packing as much as they could, they fled to England, leaving the sun, friends, and all that is familiar behind. They didn't land in comfort or glitz. Miles from central London, in the drab district of Feltham, they started a new life. The houses and the sky were both grey. It was all frigid. It was a place of exile for a child who had once swum in turquoise waters. Something began to develop, though, amid that quiet. Not only did Freddie make it through the shock, he started to alter. He attended Isleworth Polytechnic after graduating, and subsequently Ealing Art College. It was there that the magic started. Ealing had more than just a school. For misfits, artists, and rebels, it served as a playground. There, among those who refused to abide by the rules, Freddie discovered his tribe. He spent as much time dreaming of music as he did studying graphic design. He got to know Tim Staffel. They had a connection. They both had a passion for music and had perspectives beyond academics. To satirize the design industry he was expected to enter, Freddie even contributed to the creation of an underground magazine. More was what he desired. Away from school, Freddie was smitten with Hendrix. When he heard him, something glowed. He did more than only hear. He watched his performances, studied his moves, and drew him. On stage, he wanted that type of authority. He was unwilling to sing. His desire was to command. His obsession led him to join the band Ibex. They weren't well known. They shared flats and played in taverns. However, Freddie was content. He was able to attempt, fail, and try again. He was evolving into something new. He listened intently. He took in everything, including the lyrics of John Lennon and the voice of Aretha Franklin. In addition to the Beatles' harmonies, he admired Elvis Presley's wildness. He had a mind that blended rock, glam, and soul. At the same time, he and Roger Taylor were selling clothing at Kensington Market. They collaborated, socialized, and shared many laughs. It was more than a paycheck at that job. It made him look stylish. He discovered what attracted attention and what looked good, and gradually he started to stand out as Freddie instead of Farrick. Freddie Balsara was just 22 years old when things began to shift. He had recently graduated from London's art school and was uncertain about his future. He then met the Liverpool band Ibex in August 1969. They weren't well known. Only a few gigs had been played by them. They saw something in him, and Freddie saw something in them. He studied all of their songs, contributed a few of his own, and accompanied them to Bolton in 10 days. It was at the Octagon Theatre that he made his performance debut. The audience was watching the birth of a star, although they were unaware of it yet. Not only did Freddie sing, he made a move. He shone. The stage was his. Nothing like it has ever happened to the band. According to one participant, we used to simply play without worrying about putting on a show. However, Freddie altered everything. Despite having just one shirt and one pair of pants, he strolled like a rock star. Freddie was able to persuade the band to change their name by October. Wreckage replaced Ibex. So did the sound. More songs were written by Freddie. He co-wrote songs such Vagabond Outcast and FEWA with guitarist Mike Burson, and they even recorded one of those songs, Green, in Freddie's London apartment. Years later, that recording would be released and survive. But it was hardly a lasting wreck. Freddie moved on to a brief project called Sour Milk Sea when the band disbanded. And that didn't last. Freddie, however, was unfazed. He was already thinking more broadly. "We won't survive performing all this three-chord blues nonsense," he once informed his former bandmates. "We are required to compose our own music." Then the unexpected turn of events occurred. In 1970, Tim Staffel left his band on March 29. Roger Taylor and Brian May were two further members of that band, Smile. Freddie and Tim had been pals since art college. They first got together in 1965. So Freddie wasted no time when Tim left. He intervened. It seemed destined. Smile was gifted already, but Freddie added something unique and captivating. He was confident and had the voice and vision. He used to attend their performances even before he joined and offer advice on how they could improve. At first, Brian and Roger were unsure. Later, Roger claimed that he was only his eccentric friend. Someone who was always ready for fun, but not a vocalist. But it soon changed. Freddie was anticipating this. Additionally, there was no turning back once he entered. He encouraged the band to be more theatrical. In terms of stage demeanor, clothing, and everything else, he advised them to be bold. His intention was for them to be larger than life. He went on to propose Queen as a new name. It had a tremendous sound. The sound was royal. Both Roger and Brian paused. They believed it might be excessive. However, Freddie remained unwavering. He claimed that it was forceful, universal, ideal, and yes, even slightly provocative. At about the same period, he also adopted the name Mercury. This band wasn't merely new. A complete reinvention took place. However, they were still incomplete. They required a bass player. That was a challenging aspect. They gave a few tries, but none of them clicked. Subsequently, they met John Deacon in 1971. Despite being only 19, he was silent. Not as showy as the others, but a student. However, he arrived at rehearsal with a specially made amplifier and his bass. Later on, Queen's trademark sound would be shaped by the amplifier. He played with ease, maintained his modesty, and avoided vying for attention. It pleased the band. They dragged him inside. Queen was at last complete. Freddie had even more of an impact. He changed more than simply the name. Additionally, he created the logo. He drew a crest using the skills he had mastered in art school. It featured fairies, a crab, and lions, based on the zodiac signs of the band. The crab was for Brian, the lions were for Roger and John, and the fairies were for Freddie. With a phoenix above and a crown in the center, he encircled it all with a gigantic letter Q. Their debut record wasn't easy, but it looked like something royal, like it belonged to a band that was supposed to dominate the stage. Trident Studios was the recording location. The Beatles and other well-known bands had worked there. They were only allowed to use the studio late at night, after everyone else had finished, because Queen wasn't yet well-known. They would wait outside before entering and recording till dawn. It was very draining. Months passed while they continued. More negative news surfaced after the record was finished. There was a delay. They waited for ages. Finally, in July 1973, it was released. The reviews were not quite consistent. The majority didn't get it, but some did. But that didn't matter to the band. They were confident they were creating a long-lasting structure. Queen was still figuring out their own identity in 1974. Although they had talent on their earlier albums, they lacked coherence. Too lengthy, too intricate, and too much attempting to be something else. But a simple heart attack altered everything. Freddie Mercury began to take ownership of his sound at this point and ceased experimenting. Even though the songs were only 3 minutes long, he made them feel dramatic, glamorized, and tightened them up. When Killer Queen arrived, they were no longer just another band. They were the group. Queen eventually made a breakthrough after the song went viral in the UK and America. However, behind the scenes, nothing glitzy happened. Queen was impoverished. The band received part-time compensation, but its label, Trident Studios, pocketed the majority of the earnings. They were unable to pay for decent accommodation, despite having hits. Freddie lived in a small, damp apartment, and John Deacon was unable to obtain a home loan. They broke at that point. They were able to break free after months of court fights, but it cost them dearly. They had to forfeit revenues from upcoming releases and pay out hundreds of thousands. The timing was dangerous since they chose to record their most costly album ever right after they were set free. There was more to A Night at the Opera than just another record. It was a final attempt. They spent more money than any previous British band and occupied 7 studios. And put all of their money on it functioning. They were either done or it had to function. They were driven to aim higher despite the crushing strain. Bohemian Rhapsody, a 6-minute monster, was played by Freddie, who was always the most outrageous. At first, no one could understand it. No chorus, operatic insanity. Would anyone tune that into the radio? Freddie, though, wasn't inquiring. He told. He spent one day filming a low-budget but visually captivating video. Pushed it out and changed the pop music rules. The song spent 9 weeks at the top of the charts. It worked, and it was different from everything else. With the song, Freddie not only altered the music but also transformed himself. He was someone else on stage. In addition to singing, he was strutting, commanding, and acting like a guy under a spell. He had a voice capable of both sad lows and wild highs. In front of 20,000 people, he could make them all feel as though he was singing specifically for them. He snapped that mic stand by accident? He used it as a weapon, a prop, and a hallmark move. When he performed Bohemian Rhapsody live for the first time, viewers were not only taking in a show. In full bloom, they were witnessing a showman. Then that 1977 evening arrived. Hall in Bingley. You'll Never Walk Alone was abruptly sung by the audience when the band finished playing. Nobody organized it. It simply transpired. Freddie gazed with wonder. For this, we need music, he continued, turning to Brian May. We are the champions and we will rock you. Were inspired by the moment. The fans' unfiltered emotions gave rise to two of the most famous stadium anthems in history. Mercury had evolved beyond mere performance. Crowds could yell back at him while he created music. They did, too. Each and every evening. By 1980, Freddie had moved Queen away from their glam rock beginnings with the release of Another One Bites the Dust. It was an edgy, funky, and completely unexpected music. It was believed that Queen couldn't pull that off. They did, however. In the US, it became their biggest hit. Mercury didn't stick to one lane. Reimagining himself, he continued to move. Because of this, his music continued to attract new listeners. He was impossible to pin down. Success was accompanied with excess. Mercury was against saving money. He wanted to spend it. He purchased anything he pleased. He got his sister a new kitchen if she needed one. A jewelry store would be open for him if it was closed. His Ibiza birthday party was really insane. At the end, there were hundreds of broken glasses, 700 visitors, and a huge cake that was modeled after Gaudi's cathedral. Freddie's life wasn't merely big. He was the loudest person in the world. However, not all of his efforts were fruitful. Queen chose to perform in Sun City, South Africa, in 1984, during the height of the apartheid era. Despite being lawful, it was divisive. A cultural boycott was in effect. Most artists declined to attend. Still, Queen went. Others had a different opinion, but they claimed it wasn't political. The reaction was harsh. In protest songs, they were called out, punished, and banned. Even the band acknowledged that they might have aired years later. Although they said they didn't do it for financial gain, the harm had already been done. Freddie Mercury never stopped trying new things. In 1980, Queen ventured into uncharted ground with the music to the movie Flash Gordon. There weren't many songs with lyrics, and it wasn't a full-fledged rock album. Since synthesizers were still relatively new to the band, Brian May took on the most of the labor-intensive tasks. Supporters weren't sure how to interpret it. For some, the movie was less thrilling than the music. Some people didn't understand at all. However, that peculiar endeavor suggested something more significant. Queen was about to change course, and not everyone would go with her. They took Hot Space even more of a detour just 2 years later. Funk, disco, and synths were all over. The Queen was not recalled by the public. Freddie was interested, as was John Deacon. Roger wasn't, nor was Brian. Both the tension and the damage were readily apparent. Long evenings in Munich became protracted altercations. Everybody drank excessively. According to Brian, they were devastated emotionally. Roger attributed the band's transition toward homosexual dance music to Freddie's manager, Paul Prenter. For some, the record wasn't only a lousy one. It was akin to treachery. Fans turned away, but some continued to listen. Michael Jackson made notes. Musicians listened. Perhaps he did space flop. In the years that followed, however, its traces were everywhere. It was in the midst of this commotion that a miraculous event occurred. David Bowie and Queen met at a Swiss studio. Initially a jam, it became under strain. That line from the bass? Deacon purely. The power? Complete clash. That spark made the song unforgettable despite the continual arguments between Freddie and Bowie. It shot straight to the top. And it demonstrated something. Despite their internal disintegration, they could still surprise others. They needed time off by 1983. Not only were they exhausted, they had burned out. They had argued, toured, and recorded for years. At this point, they halted. Queen put themselves on hold for the first time since they started. Though it didn't solve everything, the break gave them a chance to breathe. They divided the band in two. More dancing was what Freddie and Deacon wanted. Rock was held by Roger and Brian. Only Freddie's devotion to the Printer exacerbated the situation. Nevertheless, they were able to reflect on their identity and future potential during that period of silence. In 1984, the construction began. It was the necessary reset. Freddie contributed his flair. Deacon provided rhythm. But at last, Roger and Brian were able to retrieve their guitars. The music was well balanced, combining pop and rock. Gaga's radio blew up. It became an anthem, "I Want to Break Free." The group had returned. This time, everyone, with the exception of America, took note as they remained in the charts for almost 2 years. "I Want to Break Free's" music video featured the band in drag. The joke was sent to the UK. Not MTV. They prohibited the video. The fans walked away. The audience in Rio flung objects at Freddie while he performed in the outfit. After the traumatic experience, Queen never really recovered in the United States. Freddie continued to move. There was more for him to prove. He debuted his solo album, Mr. Bad Guy, in 1985. It was unadulterated Freddie. No concessions, just him. He packed it with funny antics, melancholy ballads, and dance beats, and dedicated it to his pets. While some fans liked it, others did not. The US hardly paid any attention. But sales weren't Freddie's concern. Freedom was at issue. The Queen machine had held him captive for years. He was using his own method now. Then he took a step that nobody anticipated. Montserrat Cabal, an opera singer, was his partner. He managed to convince her that she was one of his heroes. They met in a Barcelona hotel. In a demo, he sang her parts in a falsetto. She was dumbfounded. Barcelona was captured on tape, and it was magical. No one has ever combined rock and opera like this. The song became an anthem after Barcelona was selected to compete in the 1992 European Championship. Together, they even produced an entire album. Like Freddie, it was unusual, daring, and lovely. Even though Freddie Mercury knew his time was running out, he continued to perform. Only a few months after receiving an HIV diagnosis, he returned to recording in early 1988 with Queen. He kept the people in the dark. He had no desire for pity. His only desire was to sing. And despite all of the suffering and anxiety, he managed to give it his all. As a result, the record The Miracle seemed more like a victory than a departure. It became the most popular song in Europe. It was a miracle in many ways, although people were unaware of it at the time. Next was Innuendo. Freddie's voice was still powerful even if his body had weakened by the time they worked on that album. Later, Brian May claimed that Freddie asked them to continue writing tunes. He was sick, but that didn't matter to him. He wanted to continue. "You can continue it when I leave," he informed them. He did, however, give them everything he had while he was still alive. The title track became the #1 song. It was as audacious, eerie, and brilliant as he was. It was becoming more difficult to conceal the facts in public, though. Freddie took the Brit Awards stage on February 18, 1990, to accept a Queen Lifetime Achievement Award. There were only 5 words that he said. "Many thanks, and good night." His quiet spoke louder than words. He appeared exhausted and slender, and all of a sudden the years-old rumors were very genuine. He grinned, nevertheless, even then. He gave a wave. He didn't want his followers or anyone else to notice how hurt he was. According to his bandmates, they never discussed his ailment. It was an implicit regulation. They didn't ask Freddie if he didn't want to. He returned to the studio and continued to record. He was barely able to stand on certain days. He could sing for barely an hour or 2 on some days. However, he still turned up. According to the engineers he worked with, it wasn't a depressing place. Laughter filled the air. Freddie kept things lighthearted. Despite his body's surrender, he refused to let the darkness prevail. He was immediately asked whether he could provide the vocals for The Show Must Go On. "Darling, I'll fucking do it," he said. In one take, he nailed it after downing a tumbler of vodka. That particular performance turned into one of his career's most impactful moments. These Are the Days of Our Lives, his final music video, was shot in May 1991. If you didn't look closely, you wouldn't realize it was a goodbye. To conceal how old he truly was, it was shot in black and white. He had a vest with drawings of his kitties on it. He joked and grinned while taking one take after another till he was happy. "I still love you," he muttered as he gazed directly into the camera at the end of the video. That was his last message. He was aware of what was going to happen, and he made sure everyone knew he loved them until the very end. He finally made up his mind in November, a few months later. Not another prescription. Painkillers only. He was all set. He desired tranquility. His companions were there for him at all times. He had lost his ability to paint. Despite his poor vision, he continued to laugh. He recalled things nonetheless. On November 22, he instructed the Queen's manager to make a public declaration acknowledging his AIDS diagnosis. At 8 p.m., the news was announced. Freddie Mercury, who was lying in his bed, grinned at that same moment. He was more at ease than he had been in years, according to his aide. They had lost the secret. It was nearly time for the war to end. Freddie Mercury passed away less than 24 hours later, on November 24, 1991, at precisely 6:48 p.m. He was 45 years old. A voice was gone from the earth. A legend, he was the first rock star to publicly pass away from AIDS at a time when the term itself caused unease. His passing pushed the topic into the public eye. No longer could it be disregarded. However, even in his final moments, Freddie left a riddle that no concert could resolve. Everyone was aware that he was buried in West London's Kensal Green Cemetery. The fate of his ashes was unknown to everyone. For more than a year, they were left unclaimed. His best friend and ex-lover Mary Austin took them in the end, though she never disclosed their destination. A tiny plaque was discovered by admirers at the cemetery in 2013. It had a note in French, signed solely with an M, his true name, and his birth and death dates. However, it disappeared shortly after, perhaps taken out to protect the secret.